I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the Israeli soldier Elor Azaria is finally sentenced. American Jewish communities get hit with another wave of bomb threats. And history lovers, we have some exciting news for you. Yet another ancient Hebrew inscription has been discovered in the Holy Land. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Today, Israel anxiously awaited the final sentencing of Israeli soldier Elor Azaria, and I headed to the scene to find out how locals are reacting to the news. Israeli soldier Elor Azaria has been sentenced to 18 months in Israeli prison, and the news is sending shockwaves throughout the country.
It's an absolute disgrace. He should be getting a Medal of Honor, not a sentence. It never should have come to this. I feel very scared for the future of Israel's security.
גם אני שירתתי בצבא וכל המשפחה שלי. אני מאוד פטריוטית של המדינה הזאת, אבל אני ממש מתביישת מהגזר דין הזה.
21-year-old Elor Azaria was smiling as he entered his sentencing despite the gravity of what was to come. The young soldier has been at the top of the headlines since March of 2016 when he was filmed shooting a Palestinian terrorist in the head who had already been neutralized by the IDF and was lying wounded on the ground. The assailant had just carried out a stabbing attack with another terrorist, which left one soldier lightly wounded. Since the video was released capturing the incident, the case has majorly divided the Israeli public. Some are condemning Azaria for having violated the Israeli military moral code by killing an already neutralized terrorist, while others claim he was just trying to defend himself.
I think the conviction itself, it's a crime. That boy was acting in self-defense. He was protecting his fellow soldiers. Anywhere in the world where you don't have to be politically correct, this kid would be a hero. But only in Israel, when you have to look good in front of everybody, when you care so much what the world would think about you, that is the only reason he was convicted.
This whole situation would not be as blown up as it is if there weren't an NGO in there, a leftist NGO in there, videotaping and putting it out there in the media. I think he probably would have done maybe 3 months, considering the situation, the duress that he was under and the rest of the soldiers. A year and a half, I hope they take off the time he's been in jail already, off that year and a half.
Today, Azaria's sentence was finally read out on television after a lengthy political battle, and lots of young Israelis say they now feel scared to join the army themselves because they're not sure that they'll be protected.
אני כן חושש ומפחד עכשיו ללכת לצבא, כי אני לא יודע אם הצבא יעמוד מאחוריי ואם ייתנו לי גב משפטי ויתמכו בי אם יקרה משהו חלילה משהו כזה. הוא שגה, אני חושב שהוא עשה טעות, יכול להיות. אבל הוא לא צריך לעמוד למשפט כמו עכשיו ולקבל שנה וחצי בפנים. הוא לא רצח אף אחד, זה מחבל שבא להרוג.
One of Elor Azaria's supporters even fainted upon hearing the outcome. The 18-month sentence is far less than the 3 to 5 years a military prosecution had originally requested in the case. But now several politicians say the court isn't being lenient enough and that the 21-year-old Israeli soldier should be granted a pardon. The Israeli Prime Minister and the former Labor Party leader Shili Yachimovich are among those appealing on behalf of Azaria. They're not the only ones. Hundreds of Israeli protesters gathered outside of the military court today to show their support for the young man.
You cannot win a war in the Middle East with a moral code that was invented by European colonialists. And that's precisely what the Israeli army's moral code is. It's not moral, it's suicidal. And there's nothing moral about suicide or unnecessarily sacrificing your own soldiers to gain a pat on the back from Europe.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin says he will only consider a pardon after Azaria's legal appeals are exhausted, and the soldier's defense attorneys have already asked the court to delay jailing him for at least 15 days until they've prepared an appeal. Joining me in the studio today to discuss the controversial outcome of the Elor Azaria manslaughter case is retired Brigadier General Mail Iligan and criminal law expert Sharon Nahari. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's just kind of begin with how we're feeling about this. Do you agree with the sentencing that we saw today?
Well, I think that it's a reasonable sentence. I don't have any problem with that. But I must be very honest with you to tell you that I'm not really interested in the case itself, but in the story In other words, what was the problem, what was the issue, and how it was handled, and what, if any, repercussions it might have on so many important spheres in the country, in this society.
So we'll get to that a little later on
Let's
in our
do that,
interview,
yeah.
kind of, you know, the impact this is going to have on military protocol and Israelis as a whole. But Sharon, what is your take on this?
I think that the court, at the end of the day, make a balance, which is, I said, proportional to the case. We need to remember that it's a 19 years old soldier that make a big mistake, and on the other hand, it was a terrorist that come to attack and to kill soldiers. And for the consequences, the court, I think, make a good balance. At the one hand, they decided he's guilty, and he didn't accept all the arguments. And on the other hand, the 18 months in jail will be, I think, a good balance for all of the picture.
Well, it's much less than the 3 to 5 years that the prosecution
That's
was
what the
requesting.
prosecution
Right.
asked,
So
yeah.
in that sense, I mean, you can say there is that balance. But, you know, can Azaria appeal this decision further? And I mean, we already know that they're going to be trying to do that, but what will the impact be? Will we see a pardon happen, perhaps?
First of all, Azaria can appeal according to the law. The prosecution can appeal as well. We don't know yet who's going to appeal. They just need to study the verdict. Azaria can appeal, the prosecution can appeal, anyone can appeal, both sides can appeal. But what the consequences will be, the High Court, we don't know. But I think the balance is it's in favor of Azaria and not in favor of the prosecutor.
Now, let's get back to kind of the wider issue here, which we were speaking about earlier. You know, how is this case going to impact future military protocol, you know, in the IDF?
Well, I think that the military strategy or the military perception of those situations, of these kinds of situations, is quite clear, has been very clear, very, very consistent, and it will remain as it has been for years. In other words, you do not shoot at a person who is helpless, even if he or she were or are terrorists, okay? You do what you have to do when you are engaged in a military situation, in an operational situation, but once the operational situation is over, that's it. You do not use your power as a soldier, you do not use your weapon to murder another person, because we have to remember that terrorists are people, okay? And if that's the case, and this is the stand or the position and the philosophy of the Israeli military, it will stay intact.
What do you say to, you know, the protesters that are out here supporting Elor Azaria and saying that, well, you know, this moral code is only being imposed on Israel because of the international pressure that Israel is receiving?
No, but this is not the case. It's not an international issue at all. It's a domestic issue. It's a social issue. It's a moral issue, okay? And that's what I'm going to say to anybody who is willing to listen, okay? People have all the right to say what they think and what they feel. There's no problem with that. But when it comes to decisions, we have the military to decide how to conduct an operational situation, and we have the court system to deal with judicial issues. The street and the people have no role here. They can protest. They are free to protest, okay? Through any kind of a political process, that's absolutely okay in a democracy, but they are not the ones to decide.
Now, speaking of the public voice, you know, when we look at you guys from a more personal perspective, you're both fathers and you're both Israelis. How do you feel about sending your children to the army? I know that you have young children, Sharon. Does this outcome in any way affect how you feel about sending your kids to the military?
Not at all. I think that we, in this kind of case, exactly as my friend said, you're not allowed to kill innocent people, innocent I mean, which is unarmed and injured on the floor. Exactly the same as I and you don't want that our children will go to do an operation in Gaza and they take the weapon and they'll be injured on the floor and some Palestinian will come and shoot the head. Exactly the same. exactly the same as medical treatment, that you have to treat people who are terrorists, or you like them or you don't like them. You're not allowed to kill someone that's sitting on the floor, staying on the floor, injured and unarmed. So, if my kids look now and see what are the borderlines, that you cannot act as you want on the one hand and to do what you want, and on the other hand, the state of Israel doesn't throw you away to hell.
To the wolves, right?
Yeah, because on the one hand they said that you are not right, that you are guilty. On the one hand, they didn't give you punishment, which is manslaughter. First of all, I think it's not a manslaughter; it's a murder. What we saw in the camera, it's murder. It's not a manslaughter. They make him a big favor that they executed at the beginning. They charge him with a manslaughter.
Right.
So, if someone shoots in the head of someone else, it need to be the verdict will be that he's guilty. On the other hand, they make a very, very big discount for him, that they send him only to 18 months in jail. That's what I think. So our kids need to know the border, the limits. The same way they don't want that their friend will be catch in Gaza and someone will shoot them at the head while they will stay injured on the floor.
Right.
So this is an international convention. It's not terrorist, lesbian, gays. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What are you, or what race are you, Christian, Muslim? It's not allowed.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and we'll just have to see what happens with the appeal.
Thank you.
One of Israel's more controversial bills has just passed through its first Knesset reading. The V-15 bill is designed to limit donations to NGOs that are promoting political agendas during Israeli elections. ILTV's Aaron Porras joins me with more on the story. Aaron?
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, the bill, which is very controversial, passed its first reading, which means it needs 2 more to become law, by a vote of 37 to 26. And what's interesting, if not a humorous fact, about the V-15 bill is that the name of the bill, V-15, is a little jab at the original organization called V-15, which back in 2015 was running all of those anti-Likud, anti-Netanyahu ads. The bill was inspired into being following the United States meddling in 2015 Israeli election. A bipartisan inquiry launched in the United States in 2016 found that 1.3 million shekels, or over $350,000 in United States taxpayer dollars, were funded to the One Voice group, which directed that money to an anti-Likud, anti-Netanyahu campaign. Though the action was found to be legal, the Obama administration was heavily criticized for interfering, even indirectly, with an ally's election. Allegedly designed to prevent actions like this in the future, the V-15 bill restricts NGOs from exceeding 100,000 shekels when engaging in 4 specific activities: creating voter databases and documenting their political leanings, transporting voters to polling booths based on political affiliation, directly advertising to influence certain voters with specific opinions within 3 months of an election, and campaigning for or against a particular party.
Today, American Jews are once again recovering from yet another round of nationwide bomb threats directed at their centers. And now the Trump administration is finally addressing the wave of anti-Semitism. At least 54 JCCs in 27 states and 1 province in Canada have been evacuated since January 9th. The 4th such mass disruption in just 5 weeks targeted 11 facilities in at least 6 U.S. states. In Wisconsin, dozens of children were evacuated to a nearby fire station for the 2nd time this year. Police and explosive-sniffing dogs have been checking each building, and the FBI is investigating each case, all which have so far been hoaxes. NBC News shared a statement on Twitter that's said to have come from the White House press secretary Sean Spicer, following a question about the JCCs. But the condemnation failed to specify the threats targeted Jewish institutions or even mention the word Jewish. It said hatred and hate-motivated violence of any kind have no place in a country founded on the promise of individual freedom, and that the president has made it abundantly clear that these actions are unacceptable. After hundreds of headstones were vandalized at a historic Jewish cemetery in Missouri, one resident said she's felt an uptick in hostility against Jews since President Donald Trump has been in office, and attributed that to members of his government.
It's horrifying. There's so much anti-Semitism now with all the cabinet members, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but you can't put bigots and people with so much hatred in a cabinet and not have them think it's okay to hate everybody.
Concerned family members came to check on their loved ones' gravestones, many of which had been knocked over or completely smashed apart.
I lived in Israel for a very long time, and when something like this happens, typically you go and you drive by and you look to see that everything is okay. And you want to just go and look and see how everything is. So this is one of the things that I would go and do.
Police are investigating the incident, which occurred over the weekend, but so far no arrests have been made. Despite the most recent round of rocket attacks on Israel fired by the Sinai Province Group, Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is dismissing the notion that the Islamic State-linked terrorists pose any significant threats to the security of the state. Lieberman says that while the jihadis in the Sinai are annoying and hindersome, they pose a minor threat when compared with Hezbollah on Israel's northern border and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. In fact, he even said that they're basically just, quote, random amateurs who decided to declare that they're an army. The Israeli defense chief's comments come in the wake of yesterday's rocket attack from the Sinai, in which 2 missiles fired from the peninsula landed in open Israeli territory. Luckily, the strike failed to cause any injury or damage to Israel. While no one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet, the attack does come just after the group accused Israel of killing several of its operatives in an airstrike on Saturday. Lieberman has failed to directly respond to those allegations, although he is stressing that Israel never lets any incident pass without a response. Some military strategists believe that new and more aggressive leaders of the terror group are now trying to create a balance of deterrence aimed at punishing Israel for its close security coordination with Egypt. The insurgents have been engaged in a bloody struggle for power in the peninsula for many years. You may not know it, but Israel is the 7th largest arms seller in the world, and its companies even account for 2.1% of global weapons sales. Now, Israel is prepared to relax regulations on the exports of weapons in what some are calling a renewed push to reform the industry. ILTV's Aaron Porras joins me in the studio with more. Aaron, fill us in on some of the details.
All right. Well, the effort is being led by the Defense Export Control Agency, which is a branch of the Israeli Defense Ministry. And the relaxation of the regulations that I'm going to talk about in my report comes in conjunction with the stiffening of penalties for defense contractors who violate the Defense Export Control Law. Despite a global slowdown in weapons purchases, Israel's industry actually grew by 10% last year. Now, according to a new report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Israel's increase in sales has been reflected on a global scale, because worldwide arms trade has risen to its highest level since the Cold War. Of course, the sale of advanced weaponry to foreign nations is a controversial issue within Israel, often creating strange political partnerships. In the summer of 2016, a diverse group of Israeli politicians supported the drafting of a bill that would curtail arms exports to nations with a record of egregious human rights violations.
Sources close to the Netanyahu administration are speaking out on his behalf to clarify a number of the Israeli premier's positions following lots of mixed reports. One of the Prime Minister's senior aides is strongly denying that Netanyahu informed his cabinet of plans to back away from his pledge to build a new settlement in the West Bank. That plan was made to compensate the evicted residents of the illegal Omona outpost. The Prime Minister is said to be backing away from the decision based on pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump to hold back on settlement construction. But the same sources claim that the Premier's chief of staff spoke with one of the Omona leaders to assure them that there's no chance he'll go back on the commitment and that every effort is being made to find an agreed-upon solution. According to the contract the residents signed with the government ahead of Omona's dismantlement, their new settlement is to be built within the next 2 months. Meanwhile, Regional Cooperation Minister Tzachi Hanegbi is insisting that the Prime Minister still believes in the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as Netanyahu outlined in his 2009 Bar Ilan University speech. Hanegbi, who's also just been appointed Communications Minister, not only insists that nothing's changed since then, but also that the principles of the Bar Ilan speech are even more relevant today than at the time they were given. Underscoring that point even further, Hanegbi says the two-state solution is still the valid policy of the Prime Minister of Israel and therefore the valid policy of the government of Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just became the first leader of the Jewish state to visit Singapore in 30 years. And during his official summit, the premier called for even further ventures between the two nations. The Israeli leader was greeted with an honor guard at the presidential palace before sitting down for talks with his Singaporean counterpart. At a later press conference, Netanyahu praised the joint ventures the two nations have already embarked on before calling for further cooperation to benefit both countries.
We have a joint R&D fund that has already funded 150 projects for Israeli and Singapore companies working together in a variety of fields. And I think that the opportunities are vast. We live in a technological age. The future belongs to those who innovate. Israel and Singapore are innovation nations, and together we can bring more prosperity, more hope, and a better life for our peoples, and I think for beyond our peoples, for the neighborhoods in which we live.
Singapore's Prime Minister is expressing his hope that Israel and the Palestinians will resume direct negotiations and make progress in resolving the decades-old conflict.
We've consistently believed that a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, however hard to achieve, is the only way to bring peace and security to both peoples and to the Middle East. I told the Prime Minister this last year when we met. It's still our view. And today the Prime Minister updated me on developments and his reasons for being cautiously optimistic about things. And I explained Singapore's position again and expressed my hope for peace between Israel and Palestine. And we hope that will contribute to a stabler Middle East and a stabler world.
Out of its strong support for Israel, Singapore was one of only 41 countries to abstain from voting on a United Nations resolution that granted non-member observer state status to Palestine back in 2012. In fact, relations between Jerusalem and the Southeast Asian city-state are so cordial they've been classified as a special relationship. That unofficial term describes ties that are exceptionally close in the political, diplomatic, cultural, economic, military, and historical sectors. Diplomatic relations were formalized between the two nations in May of 1969, and both have official envoys based in each other's countries. Turning to the latest Israeli startup success, a U.S. company has just purchased a private company in Israel renowned for its cannabis-based medical therapies. The American Calitera Therapeutics Corporation is paying $10 million to acquire the Israeli talent biotech firm, which specializes in developing treatments featuring an antioxidant called cannabidiol, or CBD. After being extracted from cannabis plants, the compound can be used to treat or even prevent the life-threatening graft versus host disease, which is a major cause of illness and death after stem cell and bone marrow transplants. The U.S. company is also a developer of these kinds of therapeutics. CBD is currently gaining greater recognition for its contributions towards improving a host of other medical disorders. It's natural, non-toxic, and non-psychoactive, meaning it doesn't make patients high, but offers a realm of benefits, the most critical of which is life itself. The Jewish state's long been a pioneer in the development of new cannabis-based medical treatments and is considered a world leader in the field. There's some big news among archaeologists today because yet another Hebrew inscription has been discovered during routine conservation efforts on an ancient synagogue in northern Israel. The inscription, which dates from the Roman period, was discovered on a limestone that lay overturned in the courtyard of the synagogue in Pekin. Pekin has a 2,000-year history of Jewish habitation, but today only one Jewish family remains in the predominantly Arab village. The matriarch of that family, Margalit Zinati, lives next door to the synagogue and has gone to great lengths to preserve the history of Jews in Pekin. Commenting on the find, Zev Elkin, the Minister of Jerusalem Affairs and Heritage, said that, quote, Pekin is one of the most significant sites in the Galilee and is a place where there has always been a Jewish presence.
The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by the University of Haifa Hebrew Summer Ulpan, open to everyone.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Earlier today, IDF Sergeant Elor Azaria was sentenced to 18 months in prison for manslaughter. So today our word is mishpat, the Hebrew word for sentence. Like many Hebrew words, mishpat has multiple meanings. Just like the English word sentence, mishpat can refer to a literary phrase or a judgment after a trial. In fact, the Hebrew term for courthouse is beit mishpat, meaning house of sentences. A student at law school could be said to have studied mishpatim, so today could be said that Sergeant Azaria arrived at the Beit Mishpat to receive his mishpat from somebody who studied mishpatim. And that is the last mishpat of our word of the day. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 44 or 7 degrees Celsius. You can expect tomorrow to be partly cloudy with a chance of showers and little change in temperature. The high will be about 64 or 18 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.71 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you next time.